welcome to our next lesson. Obviously our location has changed. London is in lockdown, but our learning is still ongoing. So today we are going to be looking at some exam questions for perfect competition. So the one thing that I think is important for us to understand about perfect competition and where it comes up is we know it's a theoretical market structure. We covered that in class and we covered that in the first video that you had a look at. And for me, I think that mainly it comes up in section A. We'll have a little look about where we can bring it into section C, but mainly it comes up in section A. So the first question that we're going to do today, really common question, came up in monopolistic markets last year, is this question that's on the whiteboard here. So pause, have a go, draw your answer, think about what we learned in the last video, and then we'll have a look at creating an answer together. So pause and have a go. Okay, so I hope you paused. But if you didn't, shame on you. So the diagram that I'm expecting to be drawn here, and we'll draw the diagram and then I'll go through where you get the marks from, is just the firm. So it says here, the long run equilibrium of the firm in a perfectly competitive market. So I'm not looking for that whole diagram that we did in the last video. I'm literally just looking for the firm diagram here and the long run. So we'll have a look at what that means. So as always, you need to label your axes so the examiner knows that you know what you're doing. So I'm expecting to see that AR equaling MR, and once again, if you're still unclear about why that happens, the first video goes through an example as to why that happens. Normal MC, exactly the same, that kind of Nike swoosh shape, and then finally you want your AC here, cutting the MC at its lowest point and just touching tangential to the AR and MR. Obviously we know that a firm in perfect competition is a profit maximizer, and therefore you're going to have to show that quantity there. So this is the diagram that I'm looking for. Like I said, you don't need to show the transition, you don't need to show anything else. This is just the diagram, and I'll go through with you where you would have got each one of those 4 marks. So your first mark would have come from showing that the AR equals MR, and that being perfectly elastic. So that would have been your first mark. Your second mark would have come from showing that the firm is a profit maximizer, and therefore that quantity position where MC equals MR would have been 1 mark. Your third mark would have come from showing that this here, your AC at this profit maximizing position is equal to AR, which is equal to MR. That would have been 1 mark. And your final mark would have been showing that they're making normal profit here. Normal profit's only being made. If you draw this, it would have been fine. This would have been your 4th mark. So that's where all 4 of those marks come from for that question. So moving on to our next question. Once again, read it through, pause it. If you can't read it, I'll read it for you now if you can't see it properly. It says, which one of these statements is true? A, firms in a perfectly competitive market are price makers. B, under perfect competition, consumers set prices. C, consumers are able to maximize their utility in perfect competition. Or D, in perfect competition, firms can make S&P in the long run. So have a think about it, pause the video, answer the question, then we'll kind of come back and go through which one is correct and why that's correct. So the correct answer is C, and we'll go through kind of why that's the correct answer now. So firms in a perfect competition are price makers. That's not correct. The reason why that's not correct is because firms have no price setting power, and we know that from our AR equaling our MR in horizontally perfectly elastic. They have no price setting power. If they had some price setting power, then the AR and MR would be downward sloping. If you're not quite sure why that is, go back to that first video or go back over your notes as to why it's downward sloping if they do have price setting power. It can't be B, under perfect competition, consumers set prices. We know that actually under perfect competition, it's the market that set prices. Normal market mechanisms set prices, where supply equals demand, that's where our price is. There's kind of no consumer or producers setting that. It's a combination of both of those working together. It's not D either, because we know that in the long run, firms only make normal profit. And I mean, you can go back to the start of this video if you're not quite sure why that might be. So it is C, and I can just show you a really quick diagram to kind of prove that point. I apologise for my poor labelling. So we've got demand, and then we've got supply. Now, because all of the kind of characteristics come together here, because the market sets the price, it is the market here that sets the price. This is our price equilibrium, and this here is our quantity equilibrium. Now, because of that, consumers are able to maximise their utility. So this entire area here is consumer surplus, so consumer utility. So none of that is being taken by producers through price setting power, because producers have to take the market price. They are price takers under perfect competition. So that's the reason why it's C. Well done to those of you who got this question right, and an extra well done to those of you who got both questions right. So the final thing I wanted to talk to you about is, can it come up in section C? I personally think it's very unlikely that you're going to get a full 25 mark question on perfect competition. It doesn't really happen that much. 25 mark questions are usually about government intervention or comparisons. They draw in a lot of economic theory over the 2 years. They're definitely not just completely focused and narrow. But I've got kind of like an example of a section C question here, not that I expect you to do. We haven't learned about this yet. Don't worry about it. We'll get to that probably, week 5 or 6 after Easter, just before the May half term, so don't worry. But here we've got consumers are best off under an oligopoly market structure. You don't know what this means yet, that's absolutely fine. But we could use this idea of perfect competition as a valuation for this point, or analysis depending on your line of argument. So you may well say that actually consumers are better off under perfect competition because they're able to maximise their utility. And you might draw the long run equilibrium with the consumer surplus maximised there to be able to show that it may not be true, because that doesn't happen under oligopoly market structure. Or you might talk about how there's perfect information, so consumers are able to make the best decision for them, no irrational consumer behaviour. So it forms kind of part of an argument that may come under section C, but it's definitely not, I personally don't think, it definitely won't be a very narrow full 25 mark question. So I hope that was useful for you. I hope that you managed to get both of those questions. You can ask me questions for my students in Google Classroom in the comments section. I'll quite happily go through it. I hope that you did well and you got a lot out of it. So next week we're going to be having a look at monopolistic, and we're going to start looking at imperfect market structures and what that means. All the rest of the market structures that we're going to be looking at are actually imperfect market structures. I hope that you've enjoyed your learning, and I will see you next week. Thank you.